You ever walk into a room and immediately know what's going on? Nobody said anything yet. There's no agenda on the table. Nobody's really officially in trouble, but you already know who's tense, who's checked out, who's pretending everything is just fine, and who you need to stay the heck away from. It's not fear. It's not paranoia. It's a skill. And if you're Gen X, you've probably been doing this your entire life without ever calling it anything. So today we're talking about reading the room, kind of where it came from and why Gen X has it instinctively, and why it might be one of our most valuable skills in a world that rewards speed over awareness. Now, before we get into this, I want to acknowledge something. Rad Graham recently touched on this idea in one of his latest videos, and if you haven't seen it, you should check it out. I'll put a link in the description. And he was talking about what Gen X actually gets right and why it matters. And he touched on this, but I thought it deserved its own conversation because I believe that this is one of the most powerful invisible Gen X skills there is. Reading the room. Now, people usually treat this like a personality trait. They say, oh, they're just intuitive. They're good with people. They've got great instincts. Yeah, and some people are naturals at it, but I believe that reading the room is a learned behavior. And for Gen X, well, it was born out of one simple goal. Don't get caught off guard. We didn't grow up with constant supervision. We didn't grow up with emotional coaching. We didn't grow up with warning labels. We grew up in an environment where adults were distracted, institutions were inconsistent, and the rules changed depending on who was in charge. So we adapted. We learned to walk into situations quietly, observe first, then decide if it was safe to speak. And the strange part is that even though we treat it like intuition, reading the room is absolutely teachable. It just isn't taught because nobody ever bothered to name it. This skill didn't come from some self-help book or leadership seminar. It came from survival. Gen X grew up in this weird gap. Old rules were breaking down, new ones hadn't arrived yet. Parents worked all the time, schools expected self-regulation, authority figures enforced rules inconsistently and sometimes emotionally. So you learn fast that it wasn't just what the rule was, but it was who was enforcing it and what kind of mood they were in. Say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and there were consequences. Embarrassment, punishment, being singled out, being labeled a problem. And there were no do-overs, no editing, no deleting, and no, well, that's not what I really meant. You either learn to read the environment or you learn the hard way. So reading the room wasn't about being social. It wasn't about charm. It was about risk management. So we talk about this skill like it's magic, but it's really not. What it is pattern recognition. So let me break it down. Every room has a default setting, tone, energy, and hierarchy. There are micro-shift awarenesses. The pause after a comment, body language change, a joke that doesn't really land. And you look at who officially runs the room and who people actually defer to. And there was some emotional forecasting. Well, if I say this now, what happens next? Timing control, knowing when not to speak. Gen X doesn't just react, we simulate outcomes. This is why we're often labeled quiet or measured. But here's the part that people miss. If you can actually read a room accurately, you can change the room. Let me give you a real-life example of how this works. When I was about 19 years old, I worked in a hospital as a CNA, and for those who don't know what that is, that's a certified nursing assistant. And one day, a group of us get called into a meeting with the DON, the director of nurses. And if you've ever worked in a hospital, you already know what that usually means. Nobody gets called into a meeting with the DON for good news. So we walked in, and before she even starts talking, I can feel it. Posture, silence, the tone of the first sentence. Now, I knew immediately that we were about to take a full-blown chewing out. And that's exactly how it started. A tight voice, chipped sentences, that, well, I've had enough of this type of energy. Now, while this was happening, I'm not preparing a defense. I'm not planning an argument. just watching her. Because most blowups aren't what people say they're about. They're about pressure, frustration, someone above squeezing down. So instead of reacting, I adjusted tone, posture, language. I asked clarifying questions instead of pushing back. I acknowledged pressure instead of denying problems. I shifted the energy from confrontation to collaboration without really announcing that that's what I was doing. And slowly, and almost imperceptibly, that's even a word, the temperature changed. The volume came down, the edge softened, the blame turned into explanation. And by the end of the meeting, something wild happened. She was apologizing. And as we were walking out, one of the other employees turned to me and says, "How did you do that?" And I said, "How did I do what?" She goes, "We were getting royally chewed out at the beginning of this meeting, and by the end, they were apologizing to us. I hadn't planned it. I hadn't named it. I just read the room. I adjusted to it. And by doing that, I changed it." That's why this skill feels so natural to us. We didn't learn it in theory. We learned it through repetition, trial, error, consequence. Over time, our brain starts recognizing patterns faster than conscious thought. And that's what people call intuition. But intuition isn't magic. It's just experience that never got labeled. Look at the culture now. Instant reaction is rewarded. Silence looks suspicious. Pausing is mistaken for weakness. People are trained to speak first, process later, and do it publicly. Algorithms reward loudness, not awareness. Gen X learned to scan the room. Modern culture scans engagement metrics. That's why so many people feel blindsided. They aren't broken, they're just undertrained. Look, reading the room isn't about control. It's about respect for the situation, for the people in it, for the consequences that follow. Gen X didn't develop this skill to look smart. We developed it to stay standing. And in a world that's louder, faster, more reactive than ever, that quiet skill, that pause, that awareness might be the one thing that keeps everything from going sideways. And that's not nostalgia, that's survival. Hey, that's going to do it for me today. Thank you for listening to Analog to Algorithm. I'm Paul Stevens. And where can you find me? On all major podcast platforms, on YouTube. And how can you reach me? You can reach me through the link in the description or in the comment field. Until next time, stay rad, my friends.